All right. Welcome back to the Bioactive Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about cannabis testing for microbials or microorganisms like bacteria and fungi. It's really important to remember that not all microbes are bad. In fact, most of them are good and beneficial and absolutely necessary to plants and humans. But some microbials can be pathogenic, which means that they can cause disease. And especially for some medical patients, it's really important to understand reasons why it's being tested in the legal market to ensure your products are safe. Today's guest on the podcast is Morgan Boyle, who is a microbiologist at Trichome Analytical. We will discuss what kind of testing is done in the legal market, if it's required, any potential harms, and some remediation methods for cannabis. One of the remediation methods that we talk about a couple times is irradiation, or exposing cannabis to radiation to kill all of the microbes. This is a very common method of remediation used in the industry. I think a lot of people still have questions if exposing cannabis to this energy alters the quality of the product, the smokability, or even the chemistry, which to my knowledge we do not know yet. But if anybody out there is an expert on irradiation in cannabis, I would love to talk to you. But before we dive in, I also want to say that I got such a cool voice message on bioactivepodcast.com from a listener who had a question, which is awesome, and I'm going to play that real quick. But I think this is so cool because I haven't even told you that this feature exists yet. But for anybody else who wants to ask a question or tell your story or just say something that you want to share on the podcast, head to bioactivepodcast.com and leave a voice message, and I will make sure to share them.
I just wanted to drop a voice memo saying that I have recently started listening to the podcast, and I'm personally finding it really informative and super beneficial as someone who has just moved over under careful guidance, of course, from pharmaceuticals to medicinal marijuana, and there is not enough people talking about it in an easy to digest way, whilst also being super informative. At least it's hard to find them in Australia. So I'm really loving the content. It's super helpful. I was a little bit curious about the fact that once you start smoking, your body starts to turn off cannabinoid receptors. I'm wondering if tolerance breaks bring those back or reactivate them. But just super happy with the content you make. So thank you.
Thanks for the message, and that was a great question about tolerance. So developing tolerance is your body essentially getting used to a molecule being present, and you can develop tolerance to essentially anything. So your body's way of compensating for this new substance is to take away some of those receptors or make it more difficult to activate these receptors. So if the body's making it more difficult to activate the receptors, this is called the receptor desensitization. So the receptor's not as sensitive to that stimuli. So here we're talking about THC activating that CB1 receptor. If we keep exposing these receptors to THC, eventually it's going to cause what we call receptor internalization, which is another method of tolerance where your body's actually kind of engulfing those receptors and removing them away so that they can't be activated by THC. So tolerance breaks are a great way to either bring back those receptors to expressing on the outside of the cell or to make them more sensitive to THC by keeping it away for a short amount of time. So you can either take a full tolerance break, which is usually a couple of weeks with no THC, or what I always recommend people doing is kind of tapering off THC and then tapering back on. You can use hemp products, either CBG or CBD dominant flower, if you want some sort of supplement for your ECS. But some research even shows that even just 2 days without THC changes the receptor levels in the brain. But most people that I know who take them and find benefit, it's at least 2 weeks. But honestly, even decreasing the amount of THC that you're putting in your body by 1/2 or by 1/4 of what you normally do will absolutely help with your tolerance, or just switching up consumption methods. If you're usually somebody who hits the pen all the time or dabs all the time, maybe consider switching to flower, dry herb vaping, something like that. Whatever works for your body and your lifestyle. That was a long way of saying that, yes, you're absolutely right. Tolerance is involved in what you're talking about and your body removing receptors. And that's not always a bad thing either. There's a variety of different conditions where people are actually expressing too many CB1 receptors and they may benefit from tolerance. So I'm really excited to share way more about tolerance, probably in another podcast episode, but definitely an entire chapter of my book is dedicated to that. So I will be definitely sharing that when it's available. All right, and I am going to California next week for the Emerald Cup, where I'll be speaking on a panel about the science and magic of sun-grown cannabis. But I will be sharing all of the different products and strains that I try out in Cali. So if you want to stay up to date with that, join the Bioactive Patreon chat. And if you want a free and easy way to support this podcast, make sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. So roll up your J, load up your dab, put on your walking shoes, or just drink some water, and let's chill for the next hour. Welcome back to the Bioactive Podcast. Today, I'm really excited to nerd out on microbials and cannabis with Morgan Boyle from Trichome Analytical, who works with the chemical analysis of cannabis as well as the microbial analysis of cannabis. Welcome on the podcast, Morgan. And if you wouldn't mind just giving a little more about your background and how you got interested in cannabis testing and chemistry and just cannabis in general.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me on here. This is amazing. I think you're doing great things for the community, so I appreciate your hard work, and I'm glad to be on here as a guest. I have been with the cannabis industry for probably about 8 or 9 years, I would say. I have an undergrad biology degree, and I eventually figured out that I could do microbiology in cannabis testing. So I've done that for a while now. I've worked in a few third-party privately owned testing labs that are certified with the state to test products before they're allowed to legally be sold on shelves. And I am also a consumer myself, so a medical patient, and I really would like to help legitimize the industry using science, basically.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you're a patient and a consumer too, because it means so much more to have safe quality products when you are the person that, so, thank you for doing what you're doing and being passionate about it. Would you mind just starting off talking about what is a microbe? Like when we use this terminology, microbial contamination, microbials, like what are we really talking about here? And are they all bad? Are some good? Can we just kind of start that conversation from a general perspective?
Sure. So microbials are everywhere. They're on our skin, they're in the air. There are some good and some bad, and that's also pertaining to like immunocompromised patients sometimes will have more difficulty with heavier microbial loads on products rather than those that aren't. So each state differs because cannabis is not federally legal yet. So each state comes together and picks out like a standardized testing regulations that each of the third-party labs have to follow. So I've worked in Colorado and New Jersey, and even in those two states, they're a little bit different. We test for things like yeast and mold, aerobic bacteria, coliforms, enterobacter, and then we test, that is our quality indicator side, and then we also test pathogens, which things like salmonella, staph, or sugar toxin producing E. coli, Aspergillus, Listeria.
Okay, cool. Let's break this down even more because this is great information. So you mentioned yeasts and molds and quality metrics.
Right.
Is there like a threshold there? Like if you hit X amount of species or you have X amount of growth, that something is considered quality versus not? Like how is that measured in the lab?
Right. So again, each state kind of differs. Some states do have limits for things like quality indicators like total yeast and mold and aerobic bacteria. Other states only test for pathogens, and that is just a presence or absence test. A lot of states will do, say, for example, 100,000 CFU per gram for total yeast and mold and total aerobic bacteria, and that's kind of like a quality indicator of how clean the grow is and how clean the product is, basically.
Okay.
The issue, I guess, with quality indicators is that there are good yeast and mold things for the plant that we can use as like a natural alternative to killing microbials that are not good for the plant. So sometimes if things are sprayed that have high yeast content, for example, like kind of like a probiotic spray, then they could fail for total yeast and mold.
So total yeast and mold, we're not discriminating between things that are bad, the pathogens, versus just
Correct.
anything that might be beneficial, which, it is really important, especially when we're talking about cannabis, because we're in this kind of unique situation where it's the medicine, but it's also a natural product. It's also an agricultural product, and we can't really expect it to be grown without any yeast and mold and without any sort of bacteria counterparts and other fungi. It's part of that symbiotic relationship. It's part of why the plant's even like producing some of these molecules that we know and love, the cannabinoids and terpenes. Part of that is in response to these things in the environment. They're so necessary. So yeah, I think that the total number is kind of difficult because it really doesn't have a metric of safety. It's more of just like, yeah, you have a lot of things around or you don't have a lot of things around.
Correct.
What do you think's a more like accurate way to go about that?
I would say, so right now in New York, for example, New York just started their recreational program. They originally, I believe, had limits for yeast and mold and aerobic bacteria. Now there are no limits, but you can, as a consumer, you can get the C of A, and they have to test for it, so you can look at the limits. But it's not going to like necessarily fail and not be allowed to be on the shelves. So as someone who's immunocompromised, perhaps you'd want to look into what the total load is. You can also look up the company and figure out what kind of grow they're doing and, information on if it's living soil type or hydroponic grow or stuff like that.
Yeah. Do you think that like medical products should be tested differently than adult use products because of exactly what you're kind of talking about here, that they are often immunocompromised, and if something were to happen, it's often that population of people who already is, more delicate when it comes to any sort of contaminants that coming into their body. So do you think that they should be different thresholds?
Right. So, like in New Jersey right now, the testing regulations for yeast and mold for flour is 100,000 CFU per gram. And for concentrates and other things like that are processed beforehand, it's 10,000 CFU per gram. So
Okay.
I would say over 100,000, there is probably something going on, let alone, I don't know, maybe they're spraying something and they're spraying it too close to the end of when they're going to cut it down, possibly, or the grow is dirty.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do think that for any consumer, especially medical patients, you should be able to have easy access to the C of A's. And I think more products should have QR codes and things that are easily accessible so that you can at least make an informed decision on what you're buying.
Do you think that products that are irradiated should have to say that on them, or are you concerned about that at all, or do you think it's a positive thing to get rid of the excess microbials that are present on the products?
I would say that every consumer deserves a choice, and I don't think that it should be a secret if products are irradiated. I think sometimes it is necessary, and sometimes it allows for larger grows, which do mean lower prices for people at times. So I don't think irradiation is, from what I have seen personally, I don't think irradiation is necessarily bad. We've done a few stability testings where over time it's still, there's still no added growth. And that was one thing I was concerned about, is possibly like spores would survive and then it would grow later. But I have not seen that. I would say, like, I've also seen ozone being used, and that can be pretty dangerous for the people performing, like, using that machine.
Oh yeah, what is that like? The
I
machine
think
like?
the machine, it puts O3 in the air, and helps. From what I have read and like learned is that it will clean the outside of it, but not the inside.
I wonder if it's like a chamber, like you load it
Yes,
into
I would
something.
assume
Yeah.
it's a similar, there's also, I'm assuming it's a chamber similar to like a biorad machine, which uses irradiation, which is also like a chamber. Different sizes, but kind of like, you put a bunch in at a time for a certain amount of time, and then you take it out.
I would like to know more about it, just like as far as consumer preference, and if consumers could tell the difference between irradiated weed and non-irradiated weed. I've read that irradiation potentially lowers terpenes and potentially converts some THCA to THC, but I think that's just a product of it being heated up and not necessarily like the process of irradiation.
Yeah, I can tell you that from what we've seen in the lab, terpene content hasn't gone down for irradiation. I have seen a little bit of lowering in ozone use.
Interesting. Okay.
So, that's not, we haven't done a long-term study about it. It's just like what I have seen. And in New Jersey, we do stability testing at 6 months and 12 months. So we are able to go back and check on like potency numbers and also check microbials at that 6 and 12 month mark.
That's something I was really curious about, and I know other people were too. It's like, your product is tested for microbials, and if it passes, it goes to the dispensary. Is there any risk that once it reaches the dispensary shelf, that it is then going to produce microbials that could be harmful?
So we do a test called water activity, and if there is over a certain amount of water in the flower, it fails. And that means that there's an ability for microbes to continue to grow if it's moist and wet. So they do have to pass that test before they're able to sell it at the market. And like I said, in New Jersey, we do 6 and 12 month stability testing. And so we'll do random sampling for the day, and we do sampling for that day. And then we also put product to the side for stability testing.
Interesting. That's cool that you do stability testing. That's a test that, are you mandated to do it? Just a lot of people don't want to do it in general because it takes so much space and it takes so much time.
Right. Yeah, you have to take extra product than the product that we already need to do the full panel testing, which is frustrating. But you are able to then sell those products if they're still on the shelves at 6 months and 12 months. You're able to not, continue to sell them if you have stuff left over. And I think it's good for patient and consumer safety as well.
Yeah.
Because I honestly was not sure how it was going to turn out with the irradiation and like the 6 and 12 month stability testing. But so far I've been like pleasantly surprised. I enjoy like having stuff that isn't irradiated, but I can't sit here and say that like something terrible is going to happen because there hasn't been enough studies done. And from what we've seen, it's been okay.
Yeah, and obviously part of the reason of using irradiation, at least to the the Canadian market uses it all the time, and now we're starting to see it more, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because the thresholds that we need to pass are pretty low. I mean, for again an agricultural product, like having that low of microbial load is a difficult task to do.
Hard.
And I see why people are using irradiation. I mean, you have to make your money from that crop, and you can't just like throw it away if it fails, or turn it all into distillate. So I get that. Do you think that some of the states, or maybe all of the states' laws are too strict? Do you think they should be a little more lenient, or should there be a scale, as you said, like as long as people are informed, like whatever, put it all out there?
Yeah, I do like the idea of being able to make your own informed decision, because I do know that 100,000 CFU per gram is a difficult, you have to be very, very, very clean and diligent in your grow facility. And I guess the other thing is for these larger grows, it's super difficult to have, 10 different rooms and make sure that all 10 of those rooms are clean. So the only thing that kind of gets me a little upset is that these machines are very expensive, at least for now, and it is hard for the smaller grows to afford them. And then it's also hard for them to be under that 100,000 CFU per gram mark. So there's definitely things that, you can do. And there's things like I've done some consulting to help out in grows to show them like how to keep things clean.
Cool.
But it's definitely not easy. It's definitely
can
not
you discuss
easy.
any of those like right
Yeah,
now
yeah.
of the things that you would recommend for people if they were trying to limit the microbials and contamination as much as possible?
So, big things I would say is the biggest things I have seen is after the plants are cut down and they no longer have natural defenses against microbes because now you cut the plant down and it's dead. That's when a lot of the contamination can happen. So it can happen in the dry room, curing it. It can happen trimming, so cleaning the trim blades, cleaning your tables that you're working on. A lot of people will listen to music while they're trimming their buds, and they'll go on their phone and then they go back on to trimming the buds. And yes, you have gloves on, but the gloves are now contaminated from the phone. And you want to switch your gloves in between strains. Make sure you clean off excessively your trim blades in between strains. Different strains tend to grow more microbes than others. Things like mats with cleaning product to step on in between rooms so you're not getting contamination from room to room. A lot of grows I've seen use scrubs because people that work in cannabis grows also tend to grow their own plants at home, like regular plants, whatever, and you can bring stuff from home into the grow.
So are most of the contaminants that are causing products to fail coming from the people, from the dispensary, or from the grow op, or from the processing rooms, and not necessarily from like the soil or from the environment that the plant's growing in?
I would say it's a little bit of both because there's also, standing water in grows can be terrible. If there's like a dead area in a room where there's not much airflow, that can cause issues. I would say definitely it's a little bit of both, and some, like say for water runoff, if it runs off from one plant to another, then it can get another plant sick. Different things like that. So, but I have definitely, when I have gone and done client locations, the biggest areas of contamination I have seen is the trim area, cure area, that kind of thing.
Makes a lot of sense when the plant is dead and can no longer defend itself from all of these things in the environment. That's when we have to start worrying about it the most and like taking over that role as the protector.
Right.
Cool. I'm gonna take a hit of I'm using the one of these ball vapes that I've really been enjoying.
That's really cute.
Right? So I have
one of these little Sherlock bowls that I...
Oh my gosh, a Sherlock was the first piece I ever got.
It.
Yeah, I do too. Mine was purple. I actually still have it, and I keep it as like an archive. I'm like, this is such a special piece.
Was that me this time?
No, there's a crazy storm happening outside, and I think our power flickered, and then my Wi-Fi went out.
Okay.
Whoa, I hope that... Man, how lucky that we were on a little break and it doesn't like clip out the thing. That's amazing. Okay, anyway. We've had crazy weather today. It's like crazy lightning storm, and like it literally poured so hard I got drenched coming out of the dentist.
Oh, wow. We need some rain here.
So have you seen one of these things? It's really cool.
I don't know.
So you set this thing to a certain temperature, and then you put it over your flower that's in your bong, and then it's just heating it to like a vaping temperature. So then you're dry herb vaping like through your bong.
Oh, wow.
It's cool. But anyway, we were talking about access to Homegrow for medical patients, and that is how you know it is about control and it's not about safety or access or anything else. They're trying to limit medical patients from growing their own medicine. That is just egregious.
And I can say that New Jersey does allow personal use testing. So the argument that it could potentially be dangerous is null and void because patients can get their medicine tested by a third-party privately owned lab, including Trichome Analytical in the state. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, so if you're ever curious, you can always get it tested. And, you know, if it comes from a dispensary, we can also test it if you have something that you're curious about. It's definitely something that patients should be allowed to do, and we've been trying to fight njhomegrow.com to email your senators and bug them about allowing for home grow in New Jersey.
njhomegrow.com. How long have you been with Trichome Analytical?
November will be 4 years.
Oh, cool.
I worked with a lab, Nordic Analytical Labs, in Denver for about 2.5 to 3 years previous to that.
And was that also like microbial world testing?
Yes, I was working in the micro department there as well.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting.
Have you seen the technology used or the regulations like evolve as you've been working in this space? Like whatever like tools you use, or like you see the thresholds change or new research come out and it makes us do things differently?
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of that. I mean, I would say in New Jersey, we really pushed for the limit for flour to be 100,000 CFU per gram. It previously was 10,000 CFU per gram, and that was extraordinarily difficult for anyone to pass that wasn't using irradiation. So we kind of had to go to the regulators and say, hey, you're kind of, you know, eliminating a lot of potential market and people who can't afford these big machines, and you should at least up the limit a bit. We base our testing regulations off of Maryland, and they actually started at 10,000 CFU per gram for all products, and then within about the first week or two realized that that was a mistake and switched it to 100,000 CFU per gram.
Oh, okay.
New Jersey adopted the original testing regulations, so we had to kind of fight to get to 100,000 CFU per gram.
Honestly, though, it should be the scientists who are the ones that are advocating for the changes. We're the ones who see it every single day and like really understand the implications of that. Do we know like at what level patients have gotten sick from these products? Like, is there research on at blank CFU this is correlated with, you know, increase in symptom severity or potential death?
Not necessarily. I would say that with a lot of times with the yeast and mold, it's like allergic reactions. If someone is sensitive to a certain yeast or mold, that's kind of why I feel like it should be easily accessible to see these limits and then kind of make informed decisions. With pathogens, of course, we've seen, you know, like gastrointestinal issues. There's a lot of like pulmonary issues, breathing stuff that we've seen with certain pathogens. So that's why with those, it is like a presence or absence. If it's there, it fails completely.
Yeah. What's the most common pathogen that you're seeing? Is it Aspergillus? I feel like I see the most information about Aspergillus, but I'm just kind of curious what you see the most of. I
would say Aspergillus is pretty rare. It is one of the only like naturally occurring pathogens that we're testing for, but it definitely can happen. You can also test for mycotoxins, which is what Aspergillus produces, and that's like the dangerous stuff that Aspergillus produces that can then cause pulmonary issues and illnesses.
Are you testing for the toxin and for the species that produces the toxin? Because do we know if irradiation kills or like destroys the actual chemical compound of the toxin, or does it just kill the producer and there could be like residual compound?
Well, we test for both. So I perform PCR to test for the Aspergillus. And then we have the chemistry side because it uses HPLC to do the mycotoxin testing.
Okay. So, like, how many species are you testing for? What's the panel look like there?
Okay, so New Jersey panel currently, based off of Maryland regulations, we don't have like our final New Jersey testing regulations yet. So for flour, we test for yeast and mold, aerobic bacteria, salmonella, and E. coli, and that is for flour, edibles, or I'm sorry, flour, concentrates, topicals, and then for edibles, we test for coliforms, listeria, stec, and salmonella.
Okay. So when you do see fails, which I'm assuming you do sometimes, how often are you seeing products actually fail during the microbial screening process? Is it, 1 in 10? Is it one a day? Or
I wouldn't. There are a decent amount of people in New Jersey that are using irradiation. So from what I've seen, that pretty much kills everything.
Okay.
So, and I would say the most fails in the area of the most fails we would get, it would probably be yeast and mold and then aerobic bacteria.
Okay.
So, and that's just failing that limit. I don't see that often. I don't see pathogens. I think one time I saw stec, and it was an outdoor grow down the street from a cattle farm.
Interesting. I was going to ask about indoor versus outdoor grows, because outdoor there's so many different factors.
There's so many variables. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Is that something you see a difference in general? Is indoor versus outdoor weed, outdoor having like way more microbials, and is it like a greater diversity of microbials?
Well, I would love to know that answer, but that takes speciating a whole thing takes a long time. I would say though that there's definitely way more in outdoor grow than indoor, and I think that's because the environment is way more controllable inside. And then another thing that you just made me think about is another way we could look at yeast and mold is to kind of do a speciation test maybe once a year with companies to see what kind of yeast and mold or bacteria is in the plant, and is it good or bad, and that kind of stuff to maybe add to to not take away from like natural growing processes, but to show that it can be safe.
Yeah. No, that's a great, so that's something that you offer, or that you like could potentially do?
That's something that we could do, yes, or a company could do. I would, instead of having these hard thresholds of like 100,000 CFU per gram, there is a way to check the species, and maybe you don't do that for every batch, but maybe once a year you kind of like see where you're at and what you have going on.
And so, is it normally flour that you're seeing that does contain higher levels of total yeast and mold? What you mentioned, concentrates and topicals and kind of these other products at the dispensary. How common is it for these other products to have any sort of microbial contamination?
Very rare, because they're usually a solvent or heat is used to make a lot of products. So microbials won't survive in that kind of environment.
Yeah. Awesome. So we have a couple questions from people on my Patreon, if you don't mind answering a couple. Ooh, I'll do that as well. Okay, the first one is from Liberty Tech, and they asked, as a consumer, should I be concerned with irradiated cannabis? Which I think we've sort of been talking about, but what do you think?
I would say, as of right now, probably not. With everything in cannabis, though, there isn't a lot of long-term studies done. So I can't say anything for sure. I can say from what I have seen and in the stability testing that we have done, it doesn't seem like it's growing at least at the 6-month and 12-month mark, microbials. So when the irradiation occurs, it does seem to be killing the microbes. So I can say that it is a clean product. I can say personally, as who I am as a medical consumer, I wouldn't mind having some yeast and mold and aerobic bacteria on my flour, because it is a living thing, and because we have it on ourselves, and there are good and bad, and I think it's a natural thing to have some microbes on your plants. So I would prefer to not have it irradiated. I do think that products should be more transparent about whether they do it or not. But again, it's kind of like up to, I think consumers should be able to make it their own informed decision.
Yeah. And I think you're right about it bringing the cost down too, and that having to be part of like your decision making, or at least in the future potentially, because it would really lower the cost for a lot of products. So Neil Devine asked, I've heard that many dispensaries have either moldy or chemically treated plants. How can we trust where our cannabis is sourced?
That's a good question. I would say to do your research. So I would ask about your C of A. I would ask about, once you get that C of A, you can see the lab that tested that product, and then you can look into that lab, and you can hopefully they have a website. If they don't, that's probably red flag number one. But you can see what the lab is about. You can see if they are a small lab or if they're a multi-state operator, which is a lot of the cannabis industry, especially in New Jersey right now.
So do you think labs are lying about this a lot, and that's why people have to really look into the lab more than anything? Like,
I would say that the regulations, there isn't a lot of scientific input in the regulations right now from what I've seen in a lot of states. So we need more scientists on board to help the politicians and people that are moving cannabis along, to help them, legitimize the whole testing industry. There is definitely incentive with labs to inflate THC numbers or pass tests for microbials, because that is their paying client. And if you don't have someone that is skilled in science coming and checking out these labs, then labs can get away with things. So I think audits are important. I think having scientific advisors in the regulatory committees within the state is very important. And
absolutely,
again, to legitimize this as a medicine and to be able to get the same thing every time, and also to be able to trust the numbers that you see. So yeah, there should be testing done, there should be auditing done to kind of like standardize. And I do think, hopefully if we see a descheduling at some point and it goes federal, then hopefully there will be like a standardization of testing throughout the country and not state to state to state different things.
The state to state thing is so ridiculous. And
It's crazy.
I just learned last year that Maine, I know Maine's medical program doesn't require any sort of like microbial testing for their medical patients.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's pretty crazy. And I don't know if everybody knows that, because a lot of dispensaries will do it anyway because they're medical patients and they feel like the product should be tested. But, it's just not required. And I think that's a little bit crazy, but I mean, I guess to each state's own. But it'll be interesting if it does go federal, like what we're going to see be adopted as best practices and how strict they're going to be. That's the big question.
The other thing you can look at is states should do or require, a lot of states do require like an AOAC approved method, which is like, a board of scientists come together and test these methods and say, okay, this method is reproducible in its results. So a lot of states, if they don't, they probably should tell labs that you have to do an AOAC approved method, and a lot of the labs also have to be ISO 17025 accredited. But I would say that it should be a little bit, we've also all heard about lab shopping and stuff in the cannabis industry, and I think that is because it's a state to state thing and there aren't a whole lot of scientists yet involved enough in the cannabis industry to kind of help explain why.
Something else cool about having scientists on the team, you were kind of alluding that at Trichome Analytical, you're kind of doing your own research and your own experiments and learning things. Can you share any other things that you guys are kind of just finding out from just being in this industry? I don't know if you do experiments, and if you can't share anything, that's totally fine too. I'm just curious because I used to always do these little side quests, and they weren't ever like, publishable things, but they were just like really interesting things that they were fun to do because you had the resources and you were in the space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there has definitely been some interesting. I guess what's been most interesting to me is to realize that there are people that are trying to do good and maybe using a spray that is natural with something like bacillus in it that kind of kills bad yeast and mold, and then they can fail for aerobic bacteria because bacillus is so, or they use a spray with a bunch of yeast in it, and that's kind of what we would think of as like a probiotic, and then they'll fail for yeast and mold. So I think it's an interesting balance of kind of, I have seen companies do living soil natural grows and pass microbial testing, but it's like an interesting balance of when you use these sprays, how you use them, and then also how clean your grow is, and then your process after you're cutting everything down.
That's cool. So where do you think in the future, in the microbial world of cannabis, where are we going to need more research to better understand, what these thresholds should be, or just like understand the threat to people in general?
I would say definitely do more testing on like the yeast and mold and aerobic bacteria kind of thing to see where the thresholds should really be and what in that is really harmful, and maybe to do like species specific testing at some point. If it's not every batch, then maybe yearly, or kind of look into other ways, because I do think it's a shame that sometimes people can't use natural alternatives. Yeah. Because these quality indicator tests don't really tell you, is it good or bad? It just tells you that it's there, basically.
Can you, as a testing lab, like apply for research grants, or
I would think so.
That would be interesting.
And we have talked with companies in the past of doing some different testing. I mean, we offer HLVD testing, so we've talked about maybe doing some stuff with that. Because there isn't much research done in that, and I think we're one of the few labs in New Jersey right now testing for that. So we've talked to the companies about maybe doing some internal studies that would be interesting. The issue is, it's always like a high throughput lab and trying to get out results quickly. So we only have so much time in the day, but we do some internal tests here and there that have been interesting, and it's been interesting to see this market compared to Colorado as well.
Oh, I bet. Can you talk about the differences a little bit?
I was in Colorado from 2017 to 2020, so it was already like full speed ahead at that point. So it was very busy out there, very high throughput, and there were a lot of potential clients, and it was a large industry out there. And now from New Jersey, I'm kind of watching it from the ground up, and that has been interesting. And New Jersey kind of started with a bunch of MSOs and slowly are starting to get smaller businesses licensed recently. So I'm hoping for more of that. Yeah. Because Colorado did have like their craft side, and then they had like their big kind of Walmart of weed side. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to smaller craft grows and smaller companies in New Jersey, and like seeing where that takes the industry. But it has been interesting, and cannabis industry can be very stressful because it's kind of like everything that we're doing is new, it hasn't really, I mean, this testing is based off of like food and drug testing, but it hasn't necessarily been done on cannabis, and maybe not all the cannabis products ever, because there's like everything from hot sauce to, chocolates.
Right. I love the diversity of products available now. It's like you can literally infuse anything. There's a market
Yes.
for it.
So, I have done PCR on a lot of different things for sure.
Stop. Wait, what's the weirdest one?
They had a few suppositories that we had to figure out how to break down and test. That I think it was mostly coconut oil and then infused.
Yeah, I think they are mostly coconut oil. I think that's a great product type for anything pain below the waist. It seems to work extremely well.
Yes.
And it's super long lasting too, which is, great that you can, if you have like an event or something, you can use that beforehand.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, that's interesting. I do like the hot sauces, and I guess I like the beverages too. I've been enjoying the infused. I actually have a caffeine and THC beverage right now, and that's been a really, really interesting drink to have because I always like uplifting things.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a sativa-like effect.
Right.
Which, speaking of that, I like to ask guests, their favorite, if they ever had a moment with a strain of weed that you were like, oh my gosh, this is my personalized medicine. Like, this is the perfect strain for my brain. If you ever had that moment and what strain it was.
I had Durban Zittles recently.
Interesting.
And I guess it's this, I don't know if it's just this recent one that's in New Jersey right now, but I smoked and cleaned the whole condo and I needed it. I needed to find something that was like a good daytime, but didn't make me anxious, but made me productive.
Cleaning weed. It's so amazing when you're just like satisfied with just doing the tasks and making things pretty and listening to music and vibing or like calling a friend. 10 out of 10.
I got a lot done that day. And then I think I went back to the dispensary like the next weekend and got more because I was like, okay, I have more cleaning I need to do.
Yeah, I think Durbans are typically have THCV in them, which I think has a really unique, interesting effect.
Yes.
I mean, among other things, but I think that's one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I heard that's pretty good for focus and stuff, so that would make sense.
Cool. Well, I think, that's kind of towards the end of this episode, but if you want to let people know where to find you, if you have any good book recommendations, and, any advice to future people working in the industry, and then we'll sign off.
All right. I would say a good way to check me out in the future is Morgan Caitlin on pretty much all platforms, Instagram, Snapchat, X. It's MorganCait. Oh no!
Sorry, I'm just imagining people Snapchatting you after this episode.
If you made pretty weed, I'd like to see pictures. That's all I'm asking for.
Send pics at. Sorry, continue.
Morgan Caitlin, MorganCaitlin. As I was saying earlier, Trichome has this New Jersey Homegrow initiative. So njhomegrow.com. It'll give you a pre-populated email to send to the senators to try to get these bills pushed along for, at the very least, medical home grow.
Oh, that's amazing that it's pre-populated, ready to go. All
ready
you got
to
to
go.
do is click the link. Do people have to be in New Jersey to click the link? And
please,
no, anybody can.
Us. Anybody can do it.
Well,
and it's
right
pre-populated, and then at the end, you can just sign your name at the end. But you can also change things if you would like to change things. But it is a pre-populated email, and then you can just sign your name at the end if that's what you want to do.
njhomegrow.com.
Yes,
cool.
njhomegrow.com. A good book that I recently, I don't know if you know of Box Brown. Check him out. He does.
Yeah, tell me more.
He does like easily digestible comics about the cannabis industry and issues within the cannabis industry. So he just came out with the book Legalization Nation. And
cool.
Yeah, you should check it out. And he's
I'm
on
going
Instagram.
to.
Box Brown too. Yeah, check it out. It's very easily digestible, and it's about, current issues in testing, in laws, in the whole cannabis industry. And easy to understand. So I appreciate it.
And in comic form. Like, what
Right.
more can you ask for?
Right,
Like, that's how I
exactly.
want all my news. Just in a cute little comic. And I'm like, oh,
This
the
is
world is
perfect.
burning. Awesome.
And to get into the cannabis industry, or if that's what you want to do, I mean, good luck. No, I mean,
Stop.
no. I mean, no. We do need more women in the cannabis industry for sure. Especially if women scientists in the cannabis industry would be great. But any
100%.
women in the cannabis industry, whether you like to grow the plants or, we need more women. So I just recommend getting involved any way that you can. I started by going to networking events and just kind of, I worked in New Jersey. I started trimming and packaging. And I had a biology degree, but I kind of worked in a lab for a year, knew I didn't want to do like a regular lab setting. Just got in on the ground floor and then kind of realized the West Coast had more, it was further along and more mature out there. So I moved out there
Yeah.
for a bit and just kind of networked and applied until I got a job. And I continue to try to network and build relationships, and we need to come together as a community. So it's
MJ
definitely
Unpacked was a great event.
It was.
We met at MJ Unpacked,
Yes,
but
it
I thought
was.
that was one of the best events for like networking specifically what you're talking about, because everybody was there like with a really specific purpose, and it's like almost everyone you spoke to was somebody who like was really passionate and like wanted to do something, and it was a great event. I really enjoyed it. That was in Jersey.
Yes, that was Atlantic City in New Jersey. That was nice. It was very nice.
Yeah,
And
that
I
was
mean,
cool.
I highly recommend doing all of those things. And hopefully in your state, there is cannabis smoking lounges you could go to. I did that a lot in Denver. New Jersey is hopefully coming along soon with some lounges. So that was another easy way of finding people who were in the industry or interested in the industry and meeting people. And that's kind of what I did until I was able to get in. And
I think cannabis specifically, like the in-person interactions are so important, because a lot of us are smoking together and sharing that experience. And like that is when the best networking is happening right there. Like
Right.
those conversations are so important, and talking to people about like everybody in cannabis has a story of why they're in cannabis. And it's
Yes.
really interesting to like talk to people and learn from that perspective and see how you align.
yeah, cannabis has quite literally been a lifesaver for me. So I think that it's good, that we get together and try to continue to legitimize this as a medicine, and try to continue to grow the industry in a positive way.
Yeah, and provide the safest, best quality products to people, and whatever those guidelines look like. We'll figure it out as our industry matures, but I hope that they're representative of quality cannabis and what is most medicinal to patients, and not sort of like arbitrary numbers.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and taking the time to talk about microbes and microbe testing. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and until the next time I see you, I guess, and to the
Yeah.
listeners, mad
Thank you
love,
so
everyone. Yeah, thank you.